morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip&Talkers, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Sunny.
And I'm Joe. Welcome, welcome.
Joe, 2025 is, it's basically over. I'm feeling festive, but I think our topic today is going to be a little bit sharp.
It is, yeah. This is the one our listeners have been demanding.
Yeah.
After our last deep dive into authoritarian states, this was the big request.
It really was. The feedback we got after talking about the most unpopular authoritarian states was, it was explosive.
It really was.
Everyone was saying, that was honest, that was data-driven, but what about the other side? The question was always, what about the countries that claim to be democracies? How are they doing?
Exactly. And, it's funny because the data for this list was, in a way, much easier to find.
How so?
Well, because these countries, for the most part, actually allow organizations like Ipsos and Pew to go in and collect data on public discontent. That freedom to complain is kind of the whole point of democracy.
Right. It's both its greatest strength and, right now, its biggest headache.
Perfectly put. Yeah. So that's our mission today. We're using authoritative international survey data. We're talking EIU, VDEM, Pew, Ipsos, all from 2025 to really look at 5 democratic nations.
And these are countries where their health ratings or just public satisfaction have taken a nosedive.
A sharp decline. Enough to cause both international concern and, a lot of unhappiness at home. We're really trying to understand the tensions inside these systems.
So the title today is a big one. Sip&Talk Deep Dive. The 5 most unpopular democracies in the world, 2025. This is going to be a spicy one.
It is. And before we start, I have to do my usual disclaimer.
Of course.
This is not a beauty contest. We're not just picking countries we don't like. We are focused squarely on democratic health and public support.
Okay, so where's the data from?
We're pulling from a few places. The World Population Review's composite data, the EIU's 2024 Democracy Index, the new VDEM 2025 report, and then public satisfaction surveys from Ipsos and Pew. It's a big mix.
Okay, so let's unpack that word unpopular, because it feels tricky. If a country has elections, a parliament, a court system, how does it end up on a list like this?
That is the critical question.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to be really precise. We're using a multidimensional definition.
Okay.
So dimension number 1 is domestic health. This is where we look at low public satisfaction with how their own democracy is working. We call it a high negative emotional index.
So it's when the citizens themselves are just fed up. They're tired of the system.
Exactly. It's that trust fatigue you mentioned, that people are just exhausted by the gridlock or the corruption or the infighting.
Got it. What's the second dimension?
The second one is international credibility. This is more formal. This is when an authoritative organization like the Economist Intelligence Unit or VDEM actually downgrades a country's rating.
So when you go from like a full democracy to a flawed democracy.
Precisely. Or worse. That's a huge international warning sign. It's a signal that something is systemically breaking down.
So this list isn't just full democracies having a bad year. It's a mix.
It's a real mix. We've got countries that are technically full democracies but are just, collapsing internally in terms of morale. And then we have states that are technically authoritarian, but they keep up the shell of having elections.
The performance of democracy.
Yes. They're on the list because they claim to be a democracy, and the failure to deliver on that promise makes them incredibly unpopular. We have to peel back that layer.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, disclaimer done. Let's get into it. This is purely for knowledge and, let's be honest, entertainment. So let the countdown begin. And I have to ask the big question right now.
Go for it.
Will the U.S. make the list?
Well, based on the data, the anticipation is definitely warranted. Let's kick things off with number 5 and see who gets that top spot.
Right, here we go.
Okay, coming in at number 5 on our list of the most unpopular democracies is the United Kingdom.
The UK. Okay, I have to say, that is a bit surprising. Structurally, it's still considered a full democracy, isn't it?
Right. It is. And that's the key point here. It has one of the world's most stable parliamentary systems, a strong rule of law, a really robust free media.
So if the system, the bones of it, are still strong, why is it here?
Its place on this list is driven almost entirely by that first dimension we talked about. It's a massive collapse of internal satisfaction.
The trust fatigue.
Exactly. And that's combined with a huge international image problem, especially in Europe. It's not a structural failure. It's what you could call functional fatigue. The machine is world-class, but the people running it seem exhausted.
So what does the data actually say about that feeling? What are the numbers?
Well, the Ipsos data is pretty staggering. It shows that 58% of Europeans now view the UK as selfish and chaotic.
Wow, selfish and chaotic. That's not just a policy disagreement, that's emotional.
It really is. And internally, YouGov tracking for 2025 shows that government support is consistently hitting lows we haven't seen in decades. It's this mix of deep social division, constant labor strikes, policy chaos. It just gives this perception of paralysis.
You know, the title you came up with, The Lonely Dance of the Old Empire, it really fits. It's like a retired grandparent who keeps talking about their glory days. But now they're struggling financially after retirement, and they're just yelling at the rest of the family about the house, and the neighbors, the EU, are just rolling their eyes.
That's a perfect analogy. That internal chaos makes the UK look really isolated and, frankly, unreliable on the world stage. And the core of it all, as you expect, is the persistent hangover of Brexit.
Still, after all these years.
Oh, yes. That decision, even though it was democratic, it just ripped the country apart socially. We saw it flare up in things like the 2024 London racial conflicts.
Yeah.
And it's created this chronic political infighting where the ruling parties are just spending all their energy on surviving, not governing.
And you have to look at the instability at the top, right?
Yeah.
The turnover in prime ministers it was dizzying.
Unprecedented. And it wasn't just the prime ministers, but chancellors too. And every new leader came with these radical policy reversals, like that infamous mini-budget crisis. That kind of whiplash is just devastating for public trust.
I see. So the EIU, even though they keep the UK as a full democracy, they must have noted this, right?
They did. They specifically noted that the functioning of government score took a sharp dive. So people can still vote, the press is still free, but the government they elect is seen as incompetent or just too fractured to deal with real problems, like the cost of living crisis.
Okay, but let me push back a little here. If the institutions, the courts, parliament, the free press, if they're still top tier, shouldn't the UK be ranked lower than, say, a country that VDEM actually calls an autocracy? Are we weighing image and mood too heavily?
That's a fair and critical question, and it goes back to our methodology. We're weighing both the functional health from the EIU and VDEM and this idea of public legitimacy from Pew and Ipsos.
So it's about the feeling as much as the function.
In this case, yes. The UK data shows the most profound loss of legitimacy of any full democracy on the planet. It's an example of how even the best systems can suffer this really acute self-inflicted damage. And ironically, the loud public complaining is a sign of healthy free speech.
Right.
But that noise, that constant protest, is now creating real governance problems and damaging its global standing. It's basically self-protesting its way onto this list.
Okay, point taken. The UK is the case of a system that works, but the politicians are making it intensely unpopular. Right. Let's move on to number 4.
Number 4 is Pakistan. And right up front, we need to be really clear here, because this gets at your earlier critique about mixing categories.
Okay.
Pakistan is on this list because it maintains the outward appearance of democracy. It has competitive elections, it has an active parliament, but it's fundamentally flawed. It's essentially controlled by a non-elected group.
So this isn't a democracy that failed. This is a country that's sort of performing democracy for the cameras, a custodial democracy, I've heard it called.
That is the perfect term for it. The promise of democracy has never really been delivered. And the numbers back it up. The EIU's 2025 rating is a dismal 2.84.
Wow.
Which explicitly categorizes Pakistan as an authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
So instead of getting the democratic reform you ordered, you got the military's operations manual.
Right.
And the evidence is it's overwhelming. You have the systematic control of politics by the military establishment. You have the long-term imprisonment of the incredibly popular former Prime Minister Imran Khan, which started in 2023.
And those charges always seemed very questionable.
Too many observers, yes. And then you have the 2024 general elections, which were plagued by these widespread systemic allegations of massive fraud. Observers said the level of interference was unprecedented, all designed to manage the outcome.
So we're including it because the international community judges it for that autocracy?
Yeah.
It pretends to be a democracy while acting like an autocracy.
Exactly. Its unpopularity comes from that systemic duplicity. The international community, diplomats and governments, they have to engage with the civilian government, the prime minister, the cabinet, all while knowing the real power is with the military high command. And that ambiguity, plus its geopolitical importance and, of course, its nuclear weapons, makes it this deeply distrusted and unpopular partner.
So my analogy for this one would be Like, it's the rich, nuclear-armed relative who has this big, scary toy in the basement.
Right.
But their house is constantly being run by these unwanted guests, the military, who are actually calling all the shots, and the neighbors, the international community, they're just terrified of getting caught in the crossfire.
And that instability is constant. Every election just brings a new, deeper political crisis. This cycle of elected governments being toppled or neutralized by the security state means that policy consistency is impossible.
Which has to be a nightmare for investors or anyone trying to do business there.
A complete nightmare. For investors, for international partners, for human rights groups, Pakistan is seen as this high-risk, low-trust environment where the rule of law always takes a backseat to unelected power.
So this really highlights a big problem for these international democracy indexes. How do you even rate a country where the tools of democracy exist, voting, parties, courts, but the ultimate authority isn't with the people?
It's a huge challenge. But for our purposes, it's a globally unpopular regime that has consistently failed to live up to the democratic promise it keeps making to the world.
Okay, so from a struggling old empire and a facade democracy, we are now moving to number 3. And this is a huge one, a nation whose retreat from democracy has, I think, really shocked the world.
It really has. This is the entry that has caused the most international alarm just because of its sheer scale. Number 3 is India.
India. For so long, it was celebrated as the world's largest democracy. I mean, we used to just marvel at the logistics of holding an election for, what, almost 1 billion people?
Over 1 billion now. That massive scale was the core of its democratic identity.
And the scale is still there, but you're saying the quality is not.
It has plummeted. The most critical assessment is from the VDEM Institute, which has this very granular, detailed methodology. Their 2025 report has classified India as an electoral autocracy since 2017.
An electoral autocracy, wow. Where does that put them in the rankings?
Globally, it ranks them down around 100th place.
That is a staggering drop for a country of that size and history. And VDEM said something really severe, right?
Yeah.
That compared its democratic health to the 1975 state of emergency. That seems extreme.
It is extremely severe. But VDEM's reasoning is that they see systemic changes that mirror the kind of suppression of dissent and civil liberties that happened during that emergency period. The report argues that the government is systematically eroding the essential parts of a deliberative, egalitarian democracy.
Can you get more specific? What's the mechanism of that decay? What actions are actually triggering this kind of downgrade?
Well, primarily, it's the erosion of secularism and the increasing politicization of religion. But beyond that, international groups accuse the government of using state mechanisms to systematically target and pressure dissenters, NGOs, and minority groups.
So it's not just aggressive politics, it's using the legal and financial systems as a weapon.
That's the core of the accusation, using sedition and anti-terrorism laws to silence critics, freezing the foreign funding of thousands of NGOs that are critical of the government, and putting immense pressure on the media and opposition leaders.
And we've seen specific examples like the Delhi communal conflicts in 2024 and 2025, and even opposition leaders being expelled from parliament.
Exactly. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, even suggested classifying India as a country of particular concern.
Yeah.
And you see it in other metrics, too. The World Press Freedom Index has dropped significantly, down to 161st place.
This is like that huge, chaotic family reunion, but now the host, the government, is openly refusing to let half the family even speak. It's not a vibrant debate anymore, it's just loud and forced silence.
And the scale of this retreat is what makes it so globally concerning. India is 18% of the world's population. If the world's largest democracy can backslide so quickly into an electoral autocracy, it's a hugely negative signal to other developing nations.
But we have to add the positive angle here, too. India still has incredible economic potential, huge global influence, and a history of these massive elections. There's still a potential for self-correction, right?
There is, and that's the tension. International investors and governments are often very cautious in their criticism because India's economic and geopolitical weight is only growing.
So you have this conflict between democratic erosion on one side and growing global power on the other.
Exactly. It makes India a very complex and often contradictory player on the world stage. But its internal problems have severely damaged its reputation as a democratic role model, earning it the 3rd spot on our list.
Okay, we are now into the top 2. This is where it gets really intense.
It does. So our runner-up, the second most unpopular democracy in the world, is Israel. And this one is a textbook case of a country with a robust internal democracy that is struggling with a catastrophic external image.
Right. Israel's place here is almost entirely driven by its international image, specifically because of the ongoing 2023-2025 conflict in Gaza. That put it under an intense global spotlight.
The data is it's stark. According to the Democracy Perception Index for 2025, Israel's net favorability is a staggering -23%.
-23%.
-23. To give you some context, that places it as the second worst, only ahead of Iran. That's a clear sign of widespread international rejection.
That's not just dislike, that is deep global polarization.
It is. And the Pew 2025 survey backs this up. Out of 24 countries they polled, 20 of them showed majority negative views toward Israel. In a country like Turkey, the negative rating hit 93%.
93%. Wow.
At that level, it's not just diplomatic criticism anymore. It's a global moral and legal judgment.
And while the conflict is the immediate cause, the judgment is driven by reports of massive civilian casualties, right? And the UN allegations of potential violations of international law and the ongoing settlement expansion.
That's the core conflict right there. The international community, especially countries in the global south, they see this huge disconnect.
Between what Israel says it is and what it does.
Exactly. Between its claim to be a democratic state that respects the rule of law and its governance of occupied territories and its handling of the conflict. And the scrutiny from bodies like the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court has just amplified that tension.
And we should connect this to the internal stress that was happening even before the 2023 conflict. Remember the massive protests over the judicial reform effort?
Absolutely. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. That internal crisis, which was trying to change the relationship between the government and the independent Supreme Court, that severely damaged international confidence in Israel's own checks and balances.
Because if the judicial firewall is being threatened, outside observers start to lose trust.
Precisely. They become far less trusting that the state will follow international norms during a crisis. It's a perfect example of how internal democratic stress can lead to huge external unpopularity.
My analogy for this is, Israel is like the high-achieving neighbor who insists, we run a perfect, orderly house, but they're constantly getting into these huge destructive fights with their other neighbor. And it gets so bad, the whole international community has to step in and mediate. It's really cohesive on the inside, but just so polarizing to everyone on the outside.
And we have to mention the positive angle. It has robust elections, high civil liberties for its citizens, a dynamic economy, and a fierce, vibrant internal political debate. The tension is that gap between its internal democracy and its external policies.
Okay, we've covered 4. Now for the moment of truth.
Drum roll, please. The #1 most unpopular democracy in the world for 2025 is the United States.
I'm supposed to act shocked here, but honestly, it feels kind of predictable. The U.S., the so-called Democratic lighthouse, is topping the unpopularity list. How do we get here?
It's a devastating double punch. You have massive domestic chaos combined with a sharp international image collapse, and the two are completely linked. The world sees a political system that is paralyzed by its own internal conflict.
Which makes its foreign policy seem erratic and unreliable.
Totally unreliable. And the numbers on the international collapse are shocking. The Democracy Perception Index for 2025 shows U.S. net favorability crashing from a positive 22% in 2024, down to a negative 5% in 2025.
From plus 22 to minus 5 in 1 year.
In 1 year. That is the magnitude of the fall. The U.S. is now only marginally ahead of Russia, which is at minus 9%. And critically, 55% of the countries surveyed now hold a negative view of the U.S. That includes bedrock allies like Canada and Mexico.
This is a collapse of the entire narrative. America used to be the world police, maybe, but at least they were a somewhat reliable anchor. Now it seems like the world sees it as a debt collector, just focused on its own short-term interests.
And here's the data point that should be a massive alarm bell for every U.S. policymaker.
Okay.
For the first time in this index, China's net global favorability at plus 14% has exceeded that of the U.S.
Wow.
The perception is shifting. Global sentiment is now suggesting that China offers more perceived stability and predictability than the United States. That is a pivotal moment.
The global community is essentially saying the new DJ in the club is Beijing. So what about the domestic side? What's the erosion that's feeding this perception?
Domestically, Political polarization has just metastasized.
Absolutely.
The EIU still labels the U.S. a flawed democracy, but they cite deep problems with the function of government and the political culture.
I believe it. Polls from Pew and Ipsos show that something like 61% of Americans think the country has become less democratic in just the last 5 years.
That's right.
I mean, Washington, D.C. politics feels like two ridiculously angry neighbors who hate each other so much they're fighting over where the community garbage can goes.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the rest of the neighborhood, the global community, is just left in this constant state of distress and policy uncertainty. The world isn't hating democracy, they're hating the gridlock.
And the warnings are getting more severe. VDEM specifically warned that if these trends continue, the extreme polarization, the dangerously low trust in institutions, the U.S. could be reclassified as an electoral autocracy as early as next year.
That's a terrifying thought. That's not a casual prediction.
Not at all. It's a severe methodology-based assessment that means the quality of our core civil liberties and our checks and balances is rapidly deteriorating.
Okay, before we dive into the U.S. case study, what's the positive angle here? What's preventing a total collapse?
The foundations are still strong. Things like judicial independence and high civil liberties. The system still allows for transparency and the exposure of corruption, which is crucial for self-correction. But its status as number one on this list shows that its policy stability and its global leadership have been severely, severely undermined by this internal warfare.
All right, so let's use that as a jumping off point. Let's do a deep dive case study on a specific U.S. policy that really explains this collapse of trust.
Okay, given the U.S. ranking, we have to talk about the ongoing trade war and the pervasive use of tariffs. This policy is the perfect practical example of that debt collector mentality you mentioned.
Yeah, this policy is a great illustration of how domestic political needs are just steamrolling international cooperation.
So let's just define tariffs really quickly for anyone who needs a refresher. They're just trade barriers, they're taxes on imported goods, and the main goal is to protect your own domestic industries.
And in the U.S. case, the policy has two main goals, right? And they often seem to conflict with each other.
They do. First, you have the geopolitical and security goal. This is aimed at strategic competitors, mostly China. It's about blocking their growth in critical tech sectors, semiconductors, AI, that sort of thing. It's about national security.
And then what's the second goal?
The second one is a much more nakedly domestic protection goal. This is the populist promise to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., specifically to the Rust Belt, to win over blue-collar voters in those key swing states. It's a very powerful political tool.
But the data we just talked about shows the strategy came at a huge cost to U.S. favorability. The international community, especially our allies, felt betrayed.
Profoundly betrayed. The reaction from allies was incredibly damaging. European officials were privately quoted calling U.S. tariff actions extreme unilateralism.
A double betrayal.
It was a double betrayal because the U.S. was asking for allied unity to stand up to China, but then at the same time, it was slapping taxes on products from the EU, from Canada, from its closest friends.
It's the worst kind of mixed message. It's like asking your friends to join your team to fight a common enemy, and then you start charging them for their lunch money.
Exactly. It sends a clear signal that America's self-interest trumps any shared values or cooperative agreements. And that perception went global.
Right, because these higher trade costs hurt everyone, especially developing countries trying to recover from the pandemic.
It hurt them badly. And it led many of them to conclude that the U.S. only cares about its own narrow short-term interests. And that just erodes its moral authority as a global economic leader.
And the biggest long-term damage is probably the reliability factor, the policy instability.
Precisely. That policy whiplash makes international allies deeply doubt the stability of future U.S. policy. They know that a new president could come in and just reverse everything overnight.
Which makes any kind of long-term planning with the U.S. basically impossible.
Impossible. And that uncertainty is what pushes the rest of the world to find other partners and move away from U.S. leadership.
Okay, so now let's look at the domestic side of this, because it's a really complex game with clear winners and losers at home.
It is, and we have to start with the positive view, which is that politically, it's a huge winner.
For sure.
Tariffs are a highly effective political tool. They tap into this deep-seated anger among blue-collar workers who feel like they lost their jobs to globalization. It helps secure votes in those critical Midwestern swing states.
And from a national security standpoint, there's a legitimate argument there, too. Reducing our reliance on China for critical things like minerals or high-tech parts is important.
It's vital. Tariffs can be a crucial part of a strategic industrial policy for national security. But that political win comes with some really significant economic trade-offs that most people don't see.
And the biggest one is that, at the end of the day, the American consumer pays the bill.
That is the overwhelming consensus among nonpartisan economists. The costs of tariffs are almost entirely passed directly to U.S. consumers. And just a quick reminder for everyone, I am not an investment advisor, and this is purely economic analysis based on published data.
Duly noted, we're just reading the news here, not trading stocks. But if the consumer is paying, doesn't the benefit of protecting domestic industry outweigh that cost?
Well, the benefits get significantly watered down by all the ripple effects. First, you get this massive economic distortion. All the uncertainty makes it really hard for U.S. companies to make long-term investment decisions, which can stifle innovation. But the most direct hit comes from agricultural pain.
The counter tariffs.
Yep, the counter tariffs, especially from China, they hammered U.S. farmers. And to soften that political blow, the U.S. government had to spend tens of billions of dollars in subsidies.
Which wipes out the economic benefit of the tariffs and adds to the national debt.
Exactly. The net effect is a policy that's driven by satisfying this short-term domestic populist anger at the expense of long-term global cooperation and stability.
So, the U.S. is acting with what you might call tool rationality. It's using the best tool for its own immediate goal, but it's sacrificing those shared values, and that's why it landed at number 1.
The perception is that the U.S. abandoned its role as a stable global leader and exchanged it for the role of a transactional, unpredictable, and self-serving economic power. And according to the data, that has created a massive global trust deficit.
Okay, so we have covered 5 very different nations today. We've gone from a robust system in chaos like the UK to electoral autocracies like India and Pakistan, and then the self-inflicted ruins of superpowers like the US and Israel. What's the common thread here?
The common thread across all 5 is deep internal tension and conflict.
So this data really proves that the biggest threat to modern democracy isn't some external enemy, it's internal self-destruction.
That's what it points to. The problem isn't the system itself, but the increasing inability of the political class to operate that system efficiently or cooperatively or even ethically.
And that failure leads directly to what you called trust fatigue.
Exactly. It's this deep exhaustion that citizens feel when they're just tired of their own democratic systems being so inefficient, so polarized, or so hypocritical. They see the institutions they're supposed to trust just failing to deliver or constantly tearing themselves apart.
And seeing the 2 giants, India and the U.S., decline so rapidly, that has to create a kind of global pessimism, right? It makes other countries question if democracy is even the right model anymore.
It does. But we have to leave you with one final crucial balancing thought here.
Okay.
The fact that we can even have this conversation, that our show can openly discuss this data, that organizations like VDEM and EIU can conduct these democratic health checks and publish these severe findings, that itself is a testament to the freedoms that still exist in these societies.
The freedom to criticize and dissent.
Yes. In a true autocracy, this data, this conversation, it would simply not exist.
That is a very important point. Okay, so we've seen the symptoms of this democratic unpopularity. What's the final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
The final provocative question is this. What's the main driver of this democratic breakdown? Is it the rise of economic inequality and the populist anger that comes with it? Or is it the effects of media polarization and misinformation that are basically killing the democratic center?
That is the big debate, and I'm sure it's one we will come back to next year. Thank you for walking us through this incredibly detailed and, let's be honest, pretty uncomfortable analysis.
Thank you. It's always fascinating to unpack these trends, even when they're worrying.
To all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you enjoyed today's content, please subscribe to the Sip&Talk podcast wherever you get your audio.
And please do check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. He's got some great new content and travel vlogs up.
We wish you all a safe and happy rest of 2025 and a very prosperous new year. We will see you next time.